Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God. Okay, any questions from Genesis 16 through 34, or anywhere else if you want? But 16 through 34 is what we've read in the last 7 days, up through including today.
When I gotta find the page. I wrote the question down. At the end of chapter 34, when they had all that, when they had the spoils, what did they do with the women and the children?
Well, let me look here. This is after the assault on Shechem.
Yes. It says in 28, they took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys and whatever was in the city, and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. But it never says what they did with them.
I thought I read that. The sons of Jacob, 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. It might be that they killed them.
They killed the wives and the children too?
Yeah, remember that was the command. That was the command for Jacob or Joshua going into the promised land. And we're going to talk about that tonight, why that would be.
It says they killed all the males.
Right.
But it says they took the little ones and the wives.
Right. Right. They took they took the wealth and the women and the children, so they would become slaves.
Mm-hmm. That's what they would do with them. They'd make them slaves.
Right. They were prohibited from marrying them, and so they would make them slaves. The only people that Israel, well, this is pre-law, but the only people that God allowed His chosen to make slaves were enemies. Otherwise, they would be slaves for only a period of time. What
that was euphemistic? A lot of slaves for one family.
Well, yeah, exactly, and it was a big family. There was lots of people, and we have 12 sons and a daughter, and all of their kids. You're quite quickly up to several hundred people, and their own personnel. We're talking now about a group that's several hundred strong, and now much stronger because they have slaves.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions from 16 to 34?
I never thought that in chapter 19, where Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt because she looked back, it records Abraham as looking down towards Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, he wasn't charged that he couldn't turn back like Lot and his wife. But I find that interesting that he was, given that. Ability when the residents of the city weren't.
You have to think of the perspective of how this story is being told. He wasn't in very close proximity. He was close enough that he could see from the mountaintops, because he was in Judah, in the wilderness of Judah, down into the the Jordan Rift Valley, and he could see what was happening in broad strokes, but wasn't close enough, like Lot's wife when they were fleeing and they were heading to the foothills of the mountains, and she looked back. He's looking down, just as the old statement of you go up to Jerusalem and you go down from Jerusalem. He was looking down at it from that perspective. He wasn't in Jerusalem, but he was in the same mountains.
So do you think that God literally rained from heaven, or do you think it was a volcanic eruption?
Well, if it was a volcano, we don't know where it came from, because we don't know of any volcanoes in that region that could do that. And
Okay.
one of the biggest frustrations I have when we see these great miracles is all these people that go through all this work to explain it through some naturalistic means. God doesn't need a volcano. He could have just sent, fire and brimstone and bitumen and all that other stuff. He could have sent that down. Could it have been a meteorite? Yeah, absolutely. Could it have been a whole host of them? Yeah, absolutely. Or it could have just been a miracle, which is the way I prefer to look at it.
It's reported that it's coming out of heaven.
Right.
Mostly. And whether that's heaven, the boat of God, or heaven, like comet, we don't know. But it's a volcano would, to me, say no, because that's not out of heaven.
Well, think of the last big eruption that caused the ash to float all over the United States. It came out of heaven because of the three places of heaven: where the birds fly, where the stars are, and where God is. And so it goes up over here and then comes down over there. Right. Yeah, I prefer to think of this as just a miracle by God. He added to creation by bringing in some fire and brimstone, and down it came. The real,
even if it was a meteor shower that caused it, or a volcano, which we don't think it was a volcano, it would still be a miracle that it happened in that particular place and time.
Right, exactly.
And immediately.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you come to the realization that Jesus actually maintains it all in his power all the time, it's not that far of a stretch to say, hey, I just added a little here at this time because that's what I wanted to have happen. We don't need to explain these things naturalistically. In fact, I think we do the gospel harm by saying God did it through these means, rather than just saying God did it. We diminish the awesomeness of God by saying he had to use these naturalistic means to accomplish the task.
I think almost by definition, a miracle is when God sets aside his natural law to do his will.
Right.
Yeah, it's not natural to turn water into wine.
Right.
It's not natural to, he set aside the laws of nature that he created and he put in place. He set those aside to accomplish that particular event that he needed or wanted.
Yeah, that's basically how C.S. Lewis describes it in his book on miracles, except he uses a whole bunch more words to say basically that.
Yeah.
Brian could do that too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But he uses periods and question marks and exclamation points, unlike Brian.
The Apostle Paul has some really long letters too. So
Right.
You just said, even the great Apostle Paul was fallible.
Right. But he's not up to your level of 94 words.
It was 98.
Oh, it was 98. Okay, that's even better.
All right. Can we hit 100 next paper?
Huh.
Sure. I can do that when I get extra.
Yeah. Any other questions or topics?
Isaac, what, Isaac was probably at beyond 13 years of age when Abraham was told to sacrifice him. How did Abraham get Isaac's cooperation?
Well, when I was preaching through Genesis, we talked about that, and it's been a long time
I
ago.
wasn't there.
No, you weren't there. It was a long time ago. That's part of I think the faith series that we often overlook is Abraham was old, Isaac was a teenager, probably more powerful, and yet he was subdued by his dad, and I think there was cooperation there. Isaac had to trust as well. Or, and oddly enough, some scholars are not happy with Isaac having faith. They say God knocked him out. Absolutely nothing in the text that would lead you to that. No, there's nothing in the text that would lead you to that. It just says his dad tied him up and put him on the altar. And so, in our feeble minds, the only way that happens is God knocks him out or he cooperates. Or a sneak attack by Abraham.
Dad had told him to do.
Right.
He was following his dad's orders, and Dad said, "Come on," and he did.
Right. I'm not sure I would.
If my dad had told me to get up on the altar and he was going to sacrifice me, I'm not sure I would have been cooperative.
Right. I'm not either.
Not at that point. No.
But
Isaac was.
But the patriarchal structure was different than it is for us today. So
I was just about to say that we have a different respect for our parents now from then.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know that I can rationalize how it happened, and what makes the most sense to me for the story of it. And I don't mean to say story as in make believe of it, but the account of it is that he cooperated, that he, like Abraham, trusted.
I would think that would have had to, but that blows me away.
Before he got on the altar, hey, Dad, where, we got the fire, we got the wood. Where's the sacrifice? Well, the Lord will provide. Okay. By the way, get up there. Okay.
Exactly.
There's some faith in that. There's some trust in that, and I find that whole account fascinating. I don't know that I could do that as Abraham did.
I don't have that much faith.
Yeah. But we're going to see tonight, Abraham didn't always have that kind of faith either.
True.
So, any other questions or comments?
I've ever had it.
Sybil?
But Mary, my dad has been dead for 36 years. He told me as a child never to have my teeth fixed. This very day, I still have guilt that I did not obey my father. It's a total different culture. I went against something that my father did. And I'm suffering for it now. 64 weeks and counting. He said no. That's it. He said no. And for me, whatever my dad said no is no. Done. And if Abraham said to Isaac, hop on the altar, he hopped. We will not hop. I know that theology is a little bit wrong in some people's eyes. But that's just how I feel.
It also depends a lot on the whole culture that you come from.
Right.
Yeah.
And our culture has gone a long way to minimize the authority of the parent, and it's getting worse and worse all the time. Any other comments or questions? Topics? Okay, then let's move on. Here's my first question to you all. What do we learn about God through his interactions with Abraham in Genesis 18? I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but Genesis 18 is, I'm going to read some of it if my computer will cooperate. Genesis 18 is all about the appearance of someone, of a man before Abraham, appearance of three people before Abraham. We later find out it probably was a theophany, Christophany. And we have a discussion between Abraham and the theophany, Christophany. And it ends with Abraham negotiating for the lives of people in Sodom and Gomorrah. So what do we learn about God through this process? I always appreciated how Tara Lee would remind us that we need to look to see how we can find God in every passage. So as Abraham deals with people that come up to him and tell him some things, and ultimately he negotiates with him, intercedes for Sodom before Sodom and Gomorrah are wrecked by God. What do we learn about God?
That he's a loving God, that he's gonna save the people that love him.
Okay, that he's a loving God.
He also lets him argue just that long, and then he cuts him off.
Okay.
God has not only Satan on the leash, and that's wrong to say he has us on the leash, but there's just a point where he says no.
Right. Here are the... Go ahead, Ann.
Go ahead, Ann.
God already knew what he was going to do. It was already planned, and that conversation was for Abraham's benefit, not that he was going to change God's mind.
Right. God didn't change his mind in that. But he allowed Abraham to negotiate with him, which I find fascinating. How many times do we negotiate with God when, if we just would think about it, it's already a done deal. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
I think for me, when I was reading this, my thought was that God had already dealt with Abraham about the birth of Isaac, or Abraham and Sarah about the birth of Isaac. And God was gracious with them when they were in some ways still unbelieving that God was really going to do it because of their age. And God was gracious to them in that situation. So then when God tells them that he tells Abraham he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, I think Abraham got the courage then to ask God to intercede, because he got it already been gracious to him about Isaac and his questioning about Isaac.
Yeah.
I think the sequence of events was on purpose.
Here's 5 things that I observe in the text about God, and then we'll try to put it together in some kind of framework. First, in a theophany or Christophany, whichever one it is, and we don't need to argue that tonight, we see God come to Abraham. We see an appearance of God coming into the box to talk to one of his people. We'll see that again multiple times. Ultimately, we see that in the coming of Jesus. But when God wants our attention, sometimes he comes directly to us. That to me is fascinating. The creator, sustainer of the universe jumps in the box to get my attention. Second, God gave advance notice to Abraham of the future blessings that fulfilled his promise. He said, look, you're an old fart, but and your wife is an old fartess, but I'm going to give you a baby, and from that baby, the world will be blessed. So he's given him a little advance notice. He doesn't tell him everything. He gives him a little advance notice. Hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. But he didn't tell him everything, but he gives him some advance notice so that we pay attention a little bit. I see that God says that he chose Abraham so he could lead his family in keeping the way of the Lord. Abraham is told by God, look, I chose you so you can lead the way of showing the world how to follow me. Now, his descendants were not very good at that. In fact, they were probably pretty bad at it. But we have that same call, right? To lead the way of showing how to follow God. And then the fourth one may be a little controversial, but he gives the appearance, God gives the appearance of investigating something by going to Sodom. We see in the passage, I'm going to see if these things are true. Did he not know? Of course he knew. He knows everything. There's nothing he doesn't know. He can't not know anything. So it's not like he has to go and investigate to learn something. So why does God tell us that? He tells us that. Go ahead, Ann.
For us and for Abraham.
So we can process what's going on.
Yeah.
So we can have some framework of understanding. We don't understand omniscience. So for Abraham, for the action of God to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, for Abraham had to know that God knew what was going on. And so God gives the appearance of, I'm going to investigate this so you'll know that I know what's going on. He didn't need to learn anything. God doesn't ever need, he can't learn anything because there's nothing he doesn't know. And then finally, in this passage, I see that God negotiates with with Abraham for Sodom. From Abraham's vantage point, he was negotiating with him. Well, hey God, what if they're 50? Okay, I'll relent if they're 50. Well, what if they're 40? Okay, 40. What about 30? All the way down to 5. Now, as Ann said earlier, that didn't change God's calculus at all. That was done. But it certainly changed Abraham's calculus, didn't it? It changed how he viewed what was going on. There was no way Abraham could say it wasn't just because they couldn't even find 5. Remember, that was the deal that God made with Abraham. Yeah, if there are 5, then I'm not going to destroy it. Boom, he destroys it. That tells you that there's not even 5. So God goes out of his way to approach us in a way we can understand and we can deal with. He came to Abraham. He came and got in Abraham's space, and he gave him a little advance notice of what was going on. He said, look, I've chosen you for a reason, so pay attention. And he allowed Abraham to negotiate with him. I think that tells us an awful lot of God. I think these observations give us a really interesting picture of God and his relationship with Abraham specifically, and I think all of us in general. God is not unapproachable. I know that's a double negative, but I know that God is not unapproachable. In fact, he'll come to us in time of need. The fact that God came in some physical form several times just in the book of Genesis indicates his willingness to meet us where we are. Think about that. The creator, sustainer of the universe is willing to come to where we are so that we can rationalize with him and we can relation with him. God cares enough about us to give us some advance notice of what he's going to do. It's not all a mystery of what the future is. there is coming stuff that we know some things about. And we don't know enough. I shouldn't say we don't know enough. We don't know it all, but we see enough to be able to have an idea that God is working things out ultimately for our own benefit. In choosing Abraham to build and lead a family that would demonstrate to the world what following Jehovah God looks like, God was providing for an example for all of us. God doesn't just expect us to get it right. He gives us the rules and he gives us examples. And when we look through the Old Testament, we see examples both good and bad of how to follow God. We also see that God does some things he doesn't need to do to help us understand him and his plan. God didn't need to come as a Christophany or a theophany for Abraham to understand. He could have done it other ways, but to be personal with Abraham, he came to him. He's omniscient. He already knows everything. He doesn't need to investigate these things, so he just comes to make it easier for us. He knew what Abraham would do, but Abraham couldn't comprehend what he would do without seeing God face to face, as it were. I think when we look at the text in this way, and we look for God in the text, and we see how God actually moved through this story, it sounds pretty interesting. Any questions or comments on this? Okay. Moving right along. Several times. Yeah, go ahead.
Angels went to Sodom and Gomorrah and spent the night. God didn't do that, right?
Correct.
He went back to
Correct.
heaven. Okay.
Well, I don't know where he went. I don't know where the theophany went, but yeah, he wasn't part of the team to be attacked in Sodom. Right.
Okay.
I forget what movie or show I was watching that portrayed those angels, and they portrayed them as ninja soldier angels.
That was the Roma Downey production. I don't remember what the title. It wasn't a Touched by an Angel, but it was a mini series that they did.
Okay. That very well could be. I remember seeing it and thinking, well, that's pretty cool. And I wouldn't be surprised that's exactly how they were. It was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, several times in the book of Genesis, we see Abraham claim that Sarah is his sister. Mm-hmm. What does that teach us about Abraham and God?
But God forgives.
Oh. Okay, God forgives.
That is an apple.
Yeah.
You either are, aren't Chuck?
Well, it is a half truth, because she is a half sister.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
She's a half sister.
Mm-hmm. Not a half a lie.
Yeah, but it's just like a white lie. A white lie is still a lie, right?
Right. A white lie is still a lie. Right. A white lie.
Sarcastic, guys. I know I'm not usually, but I was sarcastic.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, like we couldn't tell when you were sarcastic. I mean, probably if your mouth is moving, you're sarcastic most of the time.
Yeah.
I think that would be comfortable. Yeah.
You must have been a trained detective.
Yeah. So what does this teach us about Abraham and God? I like that God forgives.
But Abraham is still he has faith, but it isn't perfect faith.
Correct. That's the point. He trusts God, but he doesn't trust God for everything. I mean, because Sarah's a good-looking chick, and so, a king somewhere's gonna want to kill Abraham so he can have Sarah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to die for that, so I'll let Sarah be taken by a king, but he's not going to kill me because we're sister and brother. We're not husband and wife. He doesn't trust God to care for him, to protect him. He does sometimes, and maybe we could argue that he trusts God in the big things, but not in the little things. I don't know that would be the case in this, not being killed if my wife was taken. I think I'd want to be killed if my wife was taken, because I'm certainly going to die trying to prevent it. So I don't know, to me this strikes me as odd that on several occasions Abraham says, she's my sister, don't kill me. Because he just didn't trust God completely, or maybe all the time, or in that area, or however you want to figure that out. Here he has we're told.
We all like that?
Oh, we're absolutely all like that. But here's the point. We have these Bible characters that, Abraham leads the way in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, right? In the Hall of Faith, right? He is the great faith guy, right? No. He trusted God and it was counted to him for righteousness, but he didn't always. It's like I said on Sunday. Let yourself off the hook a little bit. Stop feeling guilty because you're not perfect like Abraham or Paul. Oh, by the way, they weren't either. We used to have a poster in the youth room, and you remember it with all the Bible characters and all their flaws?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing for us to remember. We have created a persona for so many of the Old Testament characters that isn't true. King David, a man after God's own heart, was a murderer and an adulterer. In the Grace Brethren Fellowship of the 70s, he couldn't be an ordained elder. So, let yourself off the hook a little bit, is what I'm saying.
You might also want to add with David that he also was a polygamist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, so was Abraham.
Oh, they all work back.
Yeah, and that's one of the odd things that you find in studying the patriarchs is God never endorsed polygamy, but he never forbade it either. But our dear departed friend, that just ain't right.
But it didn't happen so much in the New Testament, did it? So at some point...
Well, it depends on how you look at it. We overlook it a lot in the New Testament only because we don't understand Greco-Roman culture. The topic of marriage in the Greco-Roman world, remember there are 4 different kinds of marriage in the Roman world. One of them today we call prostitution. But a legal form of marriage in the Roman world, I forget what the Latin phrase is for it, but a legal form of marriage was a rent-a-wife for a couple of hours of pleasure. We used to arrest them when I was in narcotics all the time. But that was a legal form of marriage in the Roman world. And
I can almost understand it in the Old Testament because especially early on because of populating the world. That's how they really, that's how they got things going. Populating the world.
Also during that time, when you're looking at the conquering of kingdoms, it was trading wives, trading your daughters was a peace treaty.
Yeah. We're not so far removed from that. The late Queen Elizabeth, do you know where her husband came from? He was not British.
Well, he was German.
Well, no, he was Greek. He was Greek.
He was Greek. Yeah, I mean the intertwining of royal family in Europe is I mean, it's a case study in inbreeding.
Well, and they in the aristocracy outside of the royal family, they made business arrangements through marriage all the time.
Yeah.
You know, somebody had a position, no position, but they didn't have any money, so they married someone whose family had a lot of money, but no position.
Right. I mean, that's what ultimately got Solomon, right? He started marrying wives for convenience, and then he got carried away with it.
Way carried away.
Yeah.
Way carried away.
Yeah.
When did it become? I don't want to say the law because that's not really the right word. But when did it become accepted that it should only be one wife?
Well, we have nothing that I'm aware of in Scripture that endorses polygamy. We don't have a castigation of it anywhere in Scripture, except when we get to the qualifications for elders and deacons.
Correct.
So clearly, God used it to build out the tribes of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
There are 4 baby mamas to Jacob.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
2 slaves and 2 sisters. And God used that. Didn't necessarily endorse polygamy, but that was part of the plan. So I don't know that we have a prohibition against it until we get to the church and the ordination of elders.
And yet, Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, and he's the son of Leah, his first wife, not
Correct.
of Rachel.
Correct. But Judah was the 4th son, not the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd son.
I realize that.
So, polygamy is a fascinating study. If you ever want to go down a deep rabbit hole, just read some of the scholarly articles that early LDS Church writings have on it, where they argue that it is part of God's teaching. Now, most of their writings are cuckoo anyway, but they make some convincing arguments about why it should be permissible, and they only stopped permitting it publicly when the government forced them to. That always was part of their doctrine, and I can understand how they get to that from many of the Old Testament practices.
I wonder what was going on in the New Testament society that enforced the disciples and the apostles to say one wife.
Well, I think that direction came from the Holy Spirit.
But I've heard a lot of people talk about it, that it wasn't against polygamy, but rather because they couldn't be divorced.
Well, the phrase "husband of one wife" should be literally translated "one woman man," and there are many ways to interpret that in the passages. One at a time can be said. It's a prohibition against being divided in association, and clearly, the Holy Spirit was directing the church, the authors of Scripture, to write that. Why we don't see that beforehand is an interesting question. why we only see a prohibition on polygamy in those passages and not anywhere else. Elaine's statement that was part of the way that God chose to populate the earth. Polygamy was not a thing in the early church or earlier patriarchs. I think I'm a little fuzzy, but I think 7 generations before we got to the first one with 2 wives.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think Kate and Neil also knows those answers. We said this where I think it was last night after a movie that guys could have just lessened the gestation period for like a month. So I mean, there's a lot of unknown things that we don't know. Or God could just said, all right, here's 1,000 extra people.
Yeah. What's interesting when we look at the numbers of the pre-flood growth of people is we have recording first having children, at 100 or so, and them living to be 700, 800, 900 years old. Some argue that means the year was a different length than we have now. There's nothing to indicate that in the writings. What we have to remember is the ancestries that are presented in the Old Testament, and we see that he was 100 when he had so and so. Doesn't necessarily mean he didn't have children before that. It just happens to be those are the children that are followed in the timeline. Some argue that instead of starting to have babies at 100, they were having them at 20, 25, 30, and the ones that follow the timeline, or that the timeline follows, were at a later age. I think that's probably not a great explanation for it. I think there's probably societal explanation that they weren't yet married and having babies until they had done more work and built something for themselves and their families. But it's hard to. That is a difficulty in young Earth theology of why God waited for so long for them to have babies. They could have been having babies much earlier. And
Well, they always do at the end that they had, and there's other sons and daughters.
right.
Brian and I were talking last night, and I said what I picked up on so much of this reading is that one of the, I can't name everybody by name, but anyhow, the man would give his slave or whatever woman to her husband, and he would go into her, and she would have, and it lists 6 or 8 sons,
Right.
and this goes on multiple times in
Right.
the different accounts, and yet the only person, or the only time I picked up was they mentioned one female, and that was Dinah.
Right.
They never mentioned girls. It's always gobs
Right.
of guys, gobs of males.
Yeah, the idea of a 1 or 2 child family is basically unheard of in that culture or in those cultures. We're talking in the which one of the judges had 69 sons?
Yeah.
What?
And did they do that so that the men would be, in case they had to go to war or something, there would be an overpopulation of men? I don't know.
Yeah, primarily the reason for having so many kids, excuse me, was because they were basically subsistence people. They did enough today to be able to live tomorrow. And so
kids were free labor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Almost free. No kid is free, trust me.
Well, they had to carry on the family.
Yeah,
The family,
exactly.
The family had to be carried forward.
Right. And that's why a woman, why Rachel Rachel was so frustrated. You know, here her sister and the two slaves have so many kids, and she's got none, right? And that was a mark that God had cursed you, is the way it was viewed. And so when I don't know an exact number, but there are those that calculate that by the time of the flood, there were more than 10 billion, 10 with a B, billion people on the earth. We're only talking about a couple of thousand years at max from the garden to the flood.
How could that be fit in the Levant?
Well, it wasn't just in the Levant. It was all over the region, not just the Levant. The Levant is basically where Asia, Europe, and Africa come together. That's basically the Levant. I don't know if 10 billion is a good number, but they have a rationale for why they get there. It wasn't just a few thousand. It was hundreds of millions at least.
What struck me this reading was how long it was after Cain and Abel before Seth was born.
Mm-hmm.
That struck me as odd this time. Since we're talking about babies.
And Cain and Abel had to be conceived after they were kicked out of the garden.
Yes. But when Cain killed Abel, you would have thought that Seth would have come along fairly quickly after, but it appeared to be a pretty long time after.
Well, there may have been other children in between. We just don't know. We just know of the ones that are recorded, and as Katrina pointed out, each one says, and they had other sons and daughters. When they had them, we don't know. We just know the ones that are being personified in the listing. Holy cow! It's already past 8 o'clock.
Hope smokes.
Yeah, holy smokes.
We've been talking a lot.
Yeah.
And for once, it wasn't me.
Well, not always.
Is this appropriate time for amen?
Probably.
That just depends on how you well you like to live in fear.
I'm gonna die either way, so it just depends on what poison is chosen.
Yeah.
You can say amen, Brian.
So I'm not going to go through all the questions that I had, but something I'd like to. I'm going to try to pick this up next week. Why did Abraham make his servant swear an oath concerning where Isaac's wife would come from?
Because he didn't want the wife to come from Canaan.
Right. Why?
Or from the Canaanite.
Why?
Because of all the prostitution and all the sin that they had there.
Okay.
In my mind, when I was reading, I was thinking God had already communicated that to him, just like God communicated it to the Israelites when they came back from Egypt.
Well, between now and next week.
I'm sure that was wrong, but that was what went through my head.
Between now and next week, go back and read Genesis 9. That is Noah after the flood, and see if that informs why Abraham might do that, and then we'll talk about that next week. There's a couple of places where we see matchmaking going on outside of Canaan. There's a reason for that.
It says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant shall he be to his brothers."
Yep, we'll talk about it next week because it's now 8:06.
106.
It is 1:06. That's UTC time.
Wow.
Half of my life is at UTC time, so I always have a clock that says that. Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.